All right, and now we're live on Instagram. We're live on Spaces, and we can go ahead and get live on YouTube too. So we're going to talk some FCS football. We have 1 month left of the season. I'm Stan Becton here with, it didn't join on the Instagram. Let's check
I
on the
got you.
Instagram. Let's check on the Instagram one more time.
Let's see. Yeah, it's saying I cannot send a request to get in. Hang on.
Let's try do it this way really quick. Go ahead and start the live over on Instagram. Sorry about the technical difficulties, everybody. All right, so the Instagram is back live. So we're live on all three platforms now: YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter, or X Spaces. Change the name of that one.
It'll still be Twitter forever, I feel like.
Yeah, I'm a fan of calling it Twitter. What they saying? Coming to America. Your mom named you Twitter. I'm gonna call you Twitter. All right, so we got live on all three platforms. So we're going to talk some FCS football. I'm Stan Becton here with Zach McKinnell of FCS Football Central. So Zach, we're going to start off with the big questions right away. The FCS committee rankings. They dropped the top 10. They were South Dakota State 1, Montana State 2, Furman 3, South Dakota 4, Delaware 5, Montana 6, Idaho 7, Sacramento State 8, Western Carolina 9, and UIW 10. Now, of course, we had a week of games, but what did those committee rankings show you about the committee's thoughts?
I was really surprised initially. I know it didn't pan out how we expected, but I was really surprised at how much they actually valued Western Carolina. I thought that was going to be a team that isn't a quote unquote blue blood or wasn't quote unquote one of the programs that people thought were going to be good this year. I also was extremely interested to see how they rated Incarnate Word. That's a team that they're undefeated against the FCS right now, but they don't have a signature win. They don't have an FBS win. The Southland is really down this year. I was interested to see if maybe at that point a UT Martin, a North Dakota State, someone else got the benefit of the doubt over Incarnate Word. And then also too, Delaware is a team, Stan, I don't know about you, is one that I've kind of went back and forth on week to week on how to necessarily look at their ranking. That win over New Hampshire has aged poorly, I would say, but it's still, when you watch the film, the eye test is still there for Delaware. And so I was really I was interested to see how the committee saw it, but I thought the top 10 was really was pretty well put together. Now, Western Carolina's now lost. I wish this was a week to week thing because I do want to see how do they rank Montana State, Montana, Idaho. Because for the poll, there was a big conversation on which team in the Big Sky should be first, which should be second, which should be third. And at the end of the day, I do want to see how the committee would have rated that after Idaho's upset win over Montana State.
Yeah, for sure. That Big Sky trio at the top of the Big Sky, all 4-1 in conference play. It's anybody's choice how you rank them. Of course, Montana has the hardest schedule down the road of those three schools left, and we still get to see the Brawl of the Wild coming up, so that's good to see. But I liked how they had Furman and Western Carolina both in there. Of course, Western Carolina now lost, but it stood out to me that they had Furman as high as they did. I didn't think Furman was going to come in that high, but with that, it makes me think Furman could, if they went out, they could get the second seed overall in the playoffs based off the committee's thinking so far. So that was good to see.
They should. I mean, I got to see them play in person. I went to the Furman Western Carolina game, but 2 weeks ago, and I'm telling you, I understand why people are hesitant to believe in them because everyone wants to say the MVFC, the Big Sky, are the dominant teams in the subdivision, which they aren't wrong. But Furman is built perfectly for a playoff run. They have the offensive line. Their defensive line has the size, the physicality. They're a run first team, and they have an extremely experienced quarterback in Huff that consistently makes the right choices. And he's also a dual threat guy. You saw that game winning touchdown or the game clinching touchdown against Western Carolina. I think Furman's built extremely well for a deep playoff run. Now, do they make that run? It remains to be seen what the bracket looks like. But I think Furman has been consistently underrated this season.
Yeah, and there's defense. It's not really one star on that defense, but it's a bunch of really, really good players. I got to see them against Sanford, another SoCon game, and they just flew around the ball. And it's not really, it's a great team defense, and that's really what you need to win in that postseason. So, of course, we got to go back to the top of that rankings. South Dakota State, number one, undefeated. Do you think anybody can challenge the Jackrabbits this year?
That's the question I've been pondering. I think about 3 weeks ago, I said no. I said definitely no. I mean, they looked that dominant, and then I kind of hesitated. I came back on it a week ago and was like, maybe I jumped the gun because Stan, me and you saw each other at the Montana State game. We saw the Bobcats kind of give them that scare, but I still think this is a team that's improving week to week. I think when you look at Gronowski as a quarterback, he isn't going to be the, you know, throw for 6,000 yards in a season, throw for 50 touchdowns, but he's a guy that is not going to make mistakes. He's a winner. And I just think he commands that offense better than just about anyone could. And when you look at that defense, Stan, I think it's the most dominant defense in FCS right now in terms of how they suffocate opponents. And they do it in such a unique way because, Stan, if I told you to give me the qualities of an elite defense, you say you got to have an elite pass rusher. They probably are forcing a whole bunch of turnovers. That's not how South Dakota State operates. They don't really get to the quarterback. There's not a bona fide edge rusher on that team. I think they went 4 or 5 straight weeks without a sack, but they consistently play as a team. They don't allow explosive plays, and they make the opposing offenses beat themselves and have those consistent drives, which they cannot do against that defense. The linebacker spot, one of the deepest in FCS. You got Freeman, Williamson, Stallbird. And then in the secondary, which I think is very underrated, led by Deshaun Gales, I really do think South Dakota State has a team right now that is a bad matchup for almost anyone in the FCS, especially because they're going to get home field advantage. And I find it hard for any team in the country right now to go to Brookings and knock that team off. So if they get past North Dakota State this weekend, pretty much I don't see anyone being able to knock them off unless you go to Frisco and have a heck of a game. But I think this team looks focused. They look ready under Jimmy Rogers in his first season.
Yeah, and that game this weekend at Dakota Marker, that's going to be a big one, of course. Can never count out the Bison in that rivalry. But like you said, I think that defense, I mean, that back seven, that's the best back seven in the FCS right there as a unit. That's the best back seven. Now, like you said, they have to get around that edge a little bit more. Montana State was able to take advantage of that a little bit, but they just have to be able to do that and they handle that, then you have a South Dakota State team that I think could run the table. But I think we will see a lot this week, depending on that margin. If North Dakota State wins or if North Dakota State keeps it close, that could show some chinks in the armor for the defending champions.
I will be interested to see how North Dakota State chooses to attack South Dakota State. You look at that team this year, it's been inconsistent in both aspects of the game. I don't feel like North Dakota State's offensive line has been as dominant as it has been over the past few national championships. If they find a way to attack the South Dakota State team and have success, does it lay out a blueprint? Because Montana State's offense is built very similar to what we're seeing out of North Dakota State this year. Do some other teams start getting some ideas for the playoffs and start kind of looking ahead there? I'll be interested. But I will say this, Stan. I'm interested to see what the voters, the committee, if South Dakota State loses a close game, I still think there's a conversation that they have the best resume in college football right now. Where do voters, where should this team fall in the rankings? Because if you're ranking it based off a resume, there's a strong argument that they still should be the number one or two team in the country with a close loss this weekend. Now, if it's a blowout or something, different conversation, but I don't see this South Dakota State team getting blown out. But this team still has arguably the best resume in college football.
Yeah, and I mean they beat South Dakota, top 10 team, beat Montana State, top 10 team. There's few teams that have can lay claim to top 10 right now, top 10 wins. We'll see. We have Montana, Sacramento State. That could be a team that could rise up. Montana, if they beat Sacramento State this week and South Dakota State loses, that could be the new number one in the FCS, depending on what happens there. But I think we'll see a lot this weekend. I mean, those are the two top games, and there's plenty of games down the road that'll help kind of decide some of these playoff matchups down the road. But let's jump specifically to players now, away from the teams. Let's talk about the Walter Payton Award. I think we may go back to that same school we were just talking about for that, but who do you see as the front runner right now for that?
I'm actually working on an article for this week looking at the Walter Payton Award because I feel like there's a few good options right now. I think this is one because last year, let's be honest, it was really a Lindsey Scott, Tim DeMorat race at this point of the year, but I don't really think there's a clear front runner now. I think a guy is here's what I think is going to happen. It's going to be a true test of how the voters value wins versus production. Because the two guys that probably have the best shot, who probably have the best resume, Max Brosmer at New Hampshire and Matthew Saluka at Holy Cross. Those guys have been dominant this year. What, 2,600 passing yards for Brosmer, 23 touchdowns, only one pick, four rushing. And Saluka, given that he missed a Fordham game, could have hurt him in this race, but he's having a ridiculous year on the ground, almost 1,000 yards rushing, has done it through the air as well. But then you also got Mark Gronowski, which has the wins, has the stats, has the consistency. And then you also got Davius Richard, too, who's a guy that I think is, in terms of a prototypical quarterback that we like in today's age of college football, has the making of someone who could have a big game. But he missed the Valley game. He got hurt in that UCLA game. So he's kind of missed 2 weeks, which hurts him in the grand scheme of this award. And then you got the two non-quarterbacks that I really like. Jaden Sheridan at Monmouth is having another ridiculous year, leading the country in rushing. And then if you're going to give it to a wide receiver, man, I've said this for 2 years. There might not be a more dominant receiver when given the opportunity than Todd James, who also leads the country in receiving yards right now. So those are the guys that I have on my radar right now.
I have to add one name in there, Marcus Yarns, running back
Yep.
Delaware. If Delaware finishes undefeated against the FCS, I think he might find himself down in Frisco, regardless of what the team does. But I agree, Sluka, Brosmer, if they're going to have the numbers, they have better numbers than Gronowski for sure right now, and probably will finish that way. But you got to remember, Gronowski, he didn't play all his games all the way through either, so that kind of
No.
hurts his numbers. So I guess it kind of balances out with Sluka missing a game, but of course
Yeah.
Brosmer didn't miss a game. But I think it's a quarterback award. I think
Mhm.
it's really going to come down to one of those three quarterbacks. I mean, the voters, it seems like they're set in stone on the quarterback has to win this award.
Yeah, that's the sad because the problem with the wide receiver, because I mean, you can make a case for Dylan Lobby potentially, but they're going to give it to Brosmer over Lobby just because if he's having a big game, especially receiving, That means Brosmer's having a big game. I think Ty James is a little bit different because Carter Peavy's not having that season. But for a wide receiver to win it, you got to be putting up Cooper Cup numbers. And Ty James is not playing an offense that is putting up anything close to what that Eastern Washington offense is doing. And it's tough with Jaden Sherding because I feel bad for him because he's probably going to be a finalist again, and he's put up two back-to-back seasons that are worthy of a Walter Payton. Last year, he got beat out by Lindsey Scott and Tim DeMorat, who put up two legendary seasons themselves. And this year, it's really just going to come down that it's a quarterback award. But I got a feeling it's going to be Brosmer, Saluka, and Gronowski down the stretch. Now, if Saluka misses this upcoming game with another injury, I take him out of the race, sadly. But I do think Saluka, if he's healthy, comes back this week, has enough momentum, especially with a big game against Army, to get back in this race.
Yeah, how much do you think those missed games and then your backup coming in and putting up numbers? So you mentioned Davius Richard, his backup threw 5 touchdowns against Valley. You mentioned Sluka, his backup won a shootout against Fordham. How do you think that backup coming in and putting on a show kind of hurts that Walter Payton case or helps it? Maybe it's like the offense is geared for this, you know?
I don't think it. Okay, so especially in Davius's case, they no offense to this school, they played Mississippi Valley State, who has one of the worst defenses in the country right this second. So it didn't matter. Davius was going to put up the same numbers that Walker ended up putting up for Central. I don't think it hurts either case, and I think for Saluka, he's been the guy so long at Holy Cross. You had to know they had a guy behind them that they were grooming to get ready. And Fordham hasn't been a suffocating, dominant defense either. Now they've been a lot better than they were last year, but I still don't think that hurts either one of them. I think the thing that does hurt them are the stat padding games. Are you like? I think Saluka could have had 200-300 yards passing, probably 4 or 5 total, total yards on top of his rushing. So you're looking at what could have been for him. Same with Davius Richard. I mean, his passing stats are the thing that's hurts him right now because he doesn't have a whole lot of passing touchdowns as a dual threat quarterback. But if he throws 3, 4 touchdowns against Valley, that puts him right on track, being right there with Gronowski right now in terms of passing statistics. So I do think the missed games hurt them, but I don't think just because their backups went out and played well, that should take away for how great these guys are, especially watching the film and seeing how both of these guys have been staples at the quarterback position for multiple seasons. Both of these guys have won All-American awards for different publications. So I don't think you could take it away from either one of them.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of Davius Richard, we're going to jump into that HBCU space now. We see the FAMU hoodie you got on. They clinched the SWAC East. I know you said that's why you're wearing that. And in the SWAC West, 4 teams, all jumbled up there. You got Southern, Alcorn, Grambling, Prairie View. There's who out of that space do you think is going to pull away in that SWAC West? For me, I think it's going to come down to that Bayou Classic. I think we're going to be seeing a bonus treat, That game it's after week 12, it's during the FCS playoffs, but it'll be kind of a playoff game. I think that's what's going to happen in that SWAC West. What about you?
I think it actually comes down to this upcoming weekend. I think the winner of Southern versus Alcorn this weekend is probably my favorite. Now, I lean Alcorn just because they're probably the most balanced team out of the remaining contenders. You look at Southern, their defense is great. Now, it struggled against Ladarius Owens with Texas Southern last week, but everyone struggled against Ladarius Owens. He's having a ridiculous season over there, especially with Andrew Body missing the year. But Southern's defense is there, but man, offensively, it's a mess right now. 58 passing yards last week, less than 250 total yards is not going to get it done, especially going up against FAMU and possibly Central if they would have made it to the Celebration Bowl, who would be my pick for the MEAC. I think Alcorn has Jarvion Howard. Aaron Allen's been playing well. They have one of the better defenses in the conference. They're one of the top leaders in interceptions in the FCS. And then Grambling's still in that race, but defensively would be a terrible matchup against FAMU, in my opinion. FAMU's offense would put up 50 points against that defense, but it'll be interesting to see how Crawley and that team matures as an offense, especially this weekend, getting some revenge against Alabama State. I'm excited for that game, but I'm gonna ride with Alcorn right now, man. And I really do hope for the SWAC's sake that we get Alcorn because I think Grambling's a bad matchup, and I don't see PV or Southern being able to give FAMU a game in a second round, especially in Bragg, because Southern had that home field advantage last time at night all the factors were rolling toward them. I think FAMU rolls through Southern and PV. So I'm really hoping Alcorn can pull it out this weekend and get to the SWAC championship.
Well, I think FAMU probably rolls through whoever comes out of that
Yes, I,
SWAC West
I agree
based
with
off
that as well. But
yeah, based off of right now, I think they probably roll through whoever runs through that side of the division. I mean, they have the best quarterback. I mean, people like to say Coach Prime here, they have their opinions on him. But I think one thing he did say was that if you want to win in the FCS, you got to have one thing. You got to have a quarterback who can sling it, and FAMU has that. So I think the SWAC is theirs, and I think it really comes down to I don't know. I like that Southern defense. I mean, Jordan Carter balling out. That's my guy right there. He's been balling out at safety, getting interceptions. It seems like almost every week for the past few weeks. So I mean, I think I like that Southern out of that SWAC West. And then you mentioned the MEAC, you have Central winning, but I don't think you can count out Howard yet. Like
mm,
Quentin Williams, I think if he plays to his potential, they can be anybody.
yeah, to me, like the only response to that would be that's a big if. It's just to me, Howard is so inconsistent right now. Especially you look at that Delaware State game. That's a game that you should be able to walk away with if you're a true contender for the HBCU national championship. And it's just I haven't seen Howard play that complete game. Even in the FBS close losses they've had, it's been half games that kind of cost them the potential win, whether it's special teams mistakes, whether it's turnovers, whether it's defensive collapses. There's always just seems to be that misstep for Howard. And that's what gives me cause because we know that Davius Richard isn't going to make that mistake to lose them the game. We know that Central defense is slowly improving. And I think Trey Oliver's on a mission. I that's what separates Central from some of the other teams that haven't been able to repeat is I think Trey Oliver's really tapped into that team still seems to play like it's the underdog. That team still seems to play like people are doubting them. And that to me, I think Central against Howard is a matchup that's bad for Howard, especially because Trey Oliver's going to walk in that game and say they made rings because they don't respect your championship. They made rings because of this, and he's going to make it personal. And we saw what happened when it was personal against South Carolina State this past week, and they put up 62 points to send Buddy Pugh out with a bad loss.
Yeah, I forgot about that whole ring fiasco this all season. Yeah, I'm not picking Howard to win necessarily, but I think it might be closer. I think it might be. I think Howard also has a chip on their shoulder. I think it might be close if everyone's at their peak. I think it might be close. I still think Central gets that celebration, but I think it might be close. Now let's jump ahead and get to some of these FCS playoff teams on this bubble. I saw we had Desmond Reed in here. We got some more Western Carolina players. So let's start right there in that SoCon. Three teams it looks like are going to be on that bubble. If we assume Furman beats Chattanooga, runs the table, Western Carolina, Chattanooga, and Mercer. Do you think all three can get into the postseason?
Uh, Probably not all three, but I think SoCon will have Furman. Obviously, they'll probably lock up. They'll probably lock it up, but Chattanooga, if they get a win this weekend, maybe I'll say that because I think Mercer's got to win out to get in. But with Mercer, the problem is they were so inconsistent early. If you change if you take away like one of those out of conference losses and one of those close games that they lost, you have a whole different conversation about this team. But they're gonna have to win out, in my opinion. And I think the Mocs need a win this weekend too, because you got to remember they don't have a third game. They get to go play Alabama after they go play Furman this weekend. So probably not going to be an upset win in Tuscaloosa. If Chattanooga wins this weekend, they clinch that they potentially even clinched one of the auto bid for this conference. So I think Chattanooga winning this weekend possibly can get all four teams. But if I had to put money on it right now, I'm going with Chattanooga, Western Carolina, and Furman representing the SoCon. And I think Mercer, if they win out and chaos happens in the MVFC, you have one of those bubble teams collapse, or then the Big Sky, one of those. And then I think the CAA too is just pure chaos. I think there's still 7 teams that are in contention there. If it comes down where the CAA is only a 2, maybe 3 bid league, I think Mercer could sneak their way in there.
Yeah, I think it depends on that CAA for real for Mercer. But I'm glad you said Western Carolina's in because I think even with those losses they've had, I think Western Carolina still They have the resume I've seen from this year. I think they should get in for sure. I mean, that offense explosive. I want to see that offense go against some other teams from around the country for sure.
That they have to get Desmond back. That's the key for that offense. I think Cole Gonzalez is one of the best. I think him and Giovanni McCoy are going to carry the FCS over the next few years as young quarterbacks. But you could tell right now in Cole Gonzalez's development, he needs that weapon behind him to really feel comfortable in that offense, which isn't surprising because I mean Desmond Reed was having a Walter Payton year up until his injury, and when you watch that offense without Desmond Reed, without that rushing attack, Cole Gonzalez, in my opinion, watching the film, feels like he has to force plays. And when you go up against good defenses and you have to force plays, you see what happens. Mercer forces a bunch of they had 6 turnovers
Yeah.
against Mercer, and then he had 2 or 3 picks against Furman 2 weeks ago too. Desmond Reed opens up that offense. If Western Carolina's healthy, they can win a few games. If he's not there, I think they're a one and done, possibly getting to the second round and losing in that one. They have to get fully healthy before I can pick them to make a real run in the playoffs.
Yeah, for sure. And then let's go elsewhere off the bubble. So we have Western Carolina. I agree with you on Western Carolina and Chattanooga right now. And I think Mercer's that last team out. If all teams went out and Chattanooga loses, I think that's how that SoCon goes. But you mentioned the CAA, a bunch of teams. Let me just run down a list. Assuming Delaware wins out, you have teams like Richmond, Villanova, Albany, Elon, William and Mary, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, Campbell. It's so many teams in that CAA, but this year it seems like it might only be two at larges for that conference. After last year, they got four. So, what do you think is going to go on in that conference?
Yeah, so if we're talking about Delaware probably winning out, even, I think Delaware has the resume right now, and probably based on what the committee put out there, they have enough kind of cachet to get in, even if they do lose their last game. But I would say Delaware, Villanova, and I think U Albany would be that next team for me. I really do feel like people are sleeping on how good U Albany is just because I think Poffenbarger has been electric at quarterback. They have weapons at the
Sure.
wide receiver spot, and their defensive line is one of the best in FCS football, man. They can get after the quarterback. Villanova as well with they kind of have an older team. They've kind of been slept on this year. I know I had a big conversation with someone about me ranking Villanova instead of Holy Cross. There's a lot of people in that region that aren't sold on Villanova, but just based on the film, I think they have the resume to get in right now. And then I think that last bid is really going to come down to if Richmond. I never thought I'd be saying this. Richmond has the momentum right now in the CAA. You look at that early loss to Morgan State. I want to say they had a loss to Hampton. They've been rolling to keep the playoff hopes alive. I want to say they're 5-1 right now over the last like 6 weeks, which is just insane to think about. And then it's just also how does the committee look at William and Mary? It's a team that came into the season with all this hype. We know what John Pius is. We know what Nate Lynn is. Darius Wilson was one of the highest graded quarterbacks in the country. Yoder's injury really took a lot of momentum out of that rushing attack, but they have the experienced offensive line. I think Malachi Amoa is a great running back. It's just if William and Mary wins out, that could open up another seed. But I think right now the only three I'm comfortable saying right now getting in is Villanova, U Albany, and Delaware right this second.
Yeah, for sure. I agree with you. Everything you said about U Albany. Poffenbarger, last year, watching them last year, I was like, uh-oh, we have
Yeah.
we have a problem on our hands if you're one of those CAA teams looking at Poffenbarger. I love what I've seen from him and that edge. I mean, you mentioned U Albany's edge, two edge rushers. I mean, they have Dylan Kelly at linebacker, AJ Simon at corner. So all three levels of that defense, plus you had the offense to go to it. And they had that extra game. They're gonna play 12 games this year. So I don't know exactly how the committee counts that game. I had to go back and check on that rule, but I think that that's gonna be in their benefit, especially given that two of their losses are that FBS teams for sure. But I think we might see a New Hampshire or a Rhode Island, whichever one of those went out, depending on what happens with Villanova, Richmond. I think those two teams could make a push too for that. It's going to be so many 7-4 teams from that CAA, also from the Missouri Valley too. I mean, that's
Yeah.
another team with the bubble. is going to get kind of crazy. I don't even want to get into that. That's you kind of had
But
to
they have
play that out on the field.
the MVFC right now, if I'm not mistaken, could have like 6 or 7 teams with a seven wins or more at the end of the year. I mean, because you look at what Northern Iowa, Youngstown State, North Dakota State, Illinois State could technically win out and hit that 7 win mark despite a loss this past weekend. So you just don't know with that conference in terms of people on the bubble, because I think right now, obviously South Dakota State, they're in. Yeah, it's just what seed are they going to get? I think South Dakota and Southern Illinois are both in as of right now. They should be in. I think the Salukis probably one more win will probably lock their spot up. But you look at that Youngstown State, Northern Iowa, North Dakota State, North Dakota, Illinois State. If I had to say, I think Illinois State's definitely on the outside looking in. I just don't trust them to win out. And then I'll be honest, I'm not sold on North Dakota this year. I'm really not. I don't think they're a complete team. I think they're one of the bigger question marks. I know they have that big win over North Dakota State, and it was a dominant win. But then they come back, they get blown out by Northern Iowa, 27-0, and then they struggle with a winless team last week. So they've been so inconsistent. They got one signature win. If North Dakota doesn't win out, I think they should be one of the teams on the outside looking in this year.
I do think that signature win though over North Dakota State,
Yeah.
given the cachet that holds, will kind of, help them in that at-large case over if it's a kind of jumbling amongst teams that they all beat each other. I think North Dakota State gets in because I don't see them losing a game after this weekend, however that goes. And if they win this weekend, of course they're in. I think they get in. But I think North Dakota, that signature win over North Dakota State could help them because not too many teams have signature wins this year. A lot of
Mm-mm.
teams are, I think it's kind of that realignment that's going on. The signature wins are kind of down this year. But
Yeah.
speaking of teams that don't necessarily have a signature win, we have to talk about Tennessee State. I think they have a great shot to make the playoffs this year without a signature win, with only one FCS loss to come into UT Martin. What do you think so far?
Yeah, I like Tennessee State coming out of there. Now, the Big South OVC is all going to depend on who wins that conference, because you got SEMO still in competition. I think UT Martin's upset against Gardner Webb this past weekend through the whole conference for a loop, because now Gardner Webb's still in it, and you got Tennessee State still there. There's a potential for a possible like what 4-way tie, depending on that UT Martin SEMO game in a few weeks. I think right now Gardner Webb's interesting just because they have a top 30 strength of schedule. They have wins over Elon and Eastern Kentucky in the out of conference, which is probably better signature wins than Gardner Webb, Tennessee State, or UT Martin potentially have right now. But I like UT Martin getting in regardless. I would pick them to probably win the conference if they can get past SEMO. SEMO, in my opinion, I don't know if they have the out of conference to get in within a large bid, just because they lost so many close games early. It's like if you win two of those, possibly one of those, it's a different conversation. But SEMO has to win the conference to get in. And I think if Tennessee State's sitting there, man, 9-2, a 10-point loss to UT Martin on the road, and a loss to Notre Dame, I think 9-2 is good enough to get in. Like it would be tough for me to say that a 7-4 team that potentially had a slip up or two, and then had maybe one signature win deserves to get over Tennessee State. I think they get in. I think the Big South OVC is a 2-bid league. Right now, I like UT Martin and Tennessee State to be those two teams.
Yeah, I think I like UT Martin in that matchup. I like Sam Franklin running the ball against SEMO. And I think SEMO, there's no way they get it at large if they lose to UT
No.
Martin at all. Lost of what off the top of my head, Southern Illinois, was it Eastern Kentucky they lost to? I
Yep.
might be getting that one messed up. But they have 3 FCS losses already. So another one, I think
Southern Illinois beat them on like that last second touchdown. What was like a Geno Hess fumble, and then
yeah.
they hit them. They hit it like the post right over the middle, which was just the most brutal way to lose that rivalry game.
Yeah. So I think Tennessee State has a great shot on that bubble. Could get an HBCU in the playoffs for the first time since FAMU when they were 9-2. And I think that's a good kind of example of how a team that hasn't made it in a while could kind of make it in with that 9-2 record. The last conference I want to talk about is that Patriot League. We got
Mm.
to talk about the Patriot League. Holy Cross predicted to win the conference before the season. They're looking like they might be on that bubble as well. Might be one of those teams that could miss out.
Right now, I think they do. I know, like, because there was a lot of people that were upset that I didn't have them in my top 25, and they on paper they're a top 25 team, but based on resume, they're not. No signature wins, lost to Lafayette. They lose that game to Harvard, which Harvard just recently lost to Princeton, which hurts in turn Holy Cross in terms of resume. I think Lafayette with they got a 2 game lead over the rest of the conference will need to lose 2 out of the final 3. I think they're a lock for the auto bid. And Lafayette has been playing outstanding. I love their rushing attack. Their defensive line is one of the best in the country as well. Holy Cross has to beat Army. If they beat Army, it's a different conversation because they'll have that FBS win on their resume, and they also need Fordham to probably win out just to be like, listen, man, I know Fordham's not the top team in the country, but at least we beat a really good Fordham team to kind of have that argument. But I think right now, I think the Patriot is a one big bid lead, especially with how big the bubble is. It's going to be really hard to convince me that Holy Cross, especially if Saluka is still out potentially, that's one of the top 24 teams in the country.
Yeah, and do you think Lafayette could get a seed if one loss against?
No, I don't think so. I mean, your best win would be over Holy Cross. They have a win over, if I'm not mistaken, Princeton in the Ivy League, and they have a CAA win over one of the teams that is not even in contention. I'm trying to blank on who that is, but I don't listen. It took Holy Cross winning 4 straight Patriot League championships, having Matthew Saluka being undefeated with 2 straight FBS wins to get a seed, and they still weren't even what a top 3 seed. So Lafayette, I don't think has a chance. I think when you look at the seeds, you're going to have probably 3, possibly 4 from the Big Sky, 2
Definitely
possibly from
three.
the MVFC, and then you're probably going to have Delaware. That's it. I don't think Lafayette finds a way to sneak into a top 8 seed this year just because of the perception of the Patriot League each year.
Yeah, and we got a question coming in the chat here on Instagram Live. It says Montana State or Montana? We got to get to the Brawl of the Wild first. That's the last week of the season, still 2 more games before that. But who are you seeing? I kind of have my opinion on that based off what I've seen from both teams so far. But who do you see so far in that matchup?
Oh man, that's gonna be it's so tough to go. It's so tough to win on the road in that matchup. And with what Missoula is gonna be that week and how Montana's rolling, oh man, it's gonna be tough to win there. But I will say, I'm right now I'm giving the slight edge to Montana State just because they're more balanced offensively. I feel like, and I still feel like I have some question marks about Montana's quarterback. But they had the true freshman start this past weekend, who looked pretty decent against Northern Colorado, but it's going to be a big step up. And I really do wonder if Vegan and this Montana State team is going to kind of build off this loss, similar to how Montana built off that early loss in Northern Arizona and started rolling. I think Montana State coming into that game knows they're going to have to win, and I give them the slight advantage just because they're more balanced offensively. Plus, I think they got one of the best offensive lines in the country right now, and they're going to be able to establish their will on everyone. And the way Idaho played that game, 41 minutes of possession time. Can Montana replicate that? Is their offense built to replicate that? I don't know. So I'm going to lean Montana State in a close one.
Yeah, I think it kind of depends on the development of Gilman in that backfield for Montana.
Yeah.
If he can continue his trajectory, I think he's right now on a Jerry Rice Award trajectory
Yeah.
right now. I think if he continues that trajectory, I think Montana has a better shot of winning. But I agree with you what you said. Montana State, I think that consistency offensively right now is exactly what gets them over the edge. I mean, that special teams, I don't know if it comes down to a kick, I'll take Montana. We're saying does it come down to a
Yes.
kick? I'm taking Montana. But if it just comes down to a team winning by a touchdown or more, I have to go with Montana State because I think that dominant running game I think is going to translate no matter what the environment is. I think that's the key there. So we're going to get ready to do a fun portion, away from talking about these teams, we're going to do a fantasy draft of FCS players. So here's how it's going to work. We'll both be taking a quarterback, a running back, 2 wide receivers, 1 offensive line unit, and 2 defensive players. So I'm gonna let you go ahead first, and you can pick your quarterback first. So let's go ahead and see who you pick first with that first pick.
Oh man, I'm gonna go with Gronowski. Give me Gronowski. I'm always going to pick a guy who can win, a guy who's played in the big games, a guy that I feel like is not going to make the mistakes to lose me the game, and I can load him up on wide receivers. Yeah, give me Gronowski with the first pick.
So I was hoping you would take one of the other quarterbacks there. I was hoping I could get Gronowski with that second pick. That makes it a little bit harder for me, but I think I'm gonna have to go with Matthew Sluka there. It was between Sluka or Davius Richard, but I think I'm gonna go with Sluka simply because I think Sluka he has a little bit more big play through the air in him than Richard. But if it's close, I'm gonna go with Sluka though, and I guess we'll do it snake style. So for running back, I think right now, I think assuming everyone's healthy, we'll go Desmond Reed, running back.
I like that. Give me Jaden Sheridan. I don't think there's been a more consistent running back in FCS football over the past few years. I mean, part of me just wants to say, just give me the Montana State running back room because they consistently, doesn't matter who it is. But listen, Jaden Sheridan's explosive. I think just in any offense, he can get it done. And I love his physicality. Plus, he's never hurt. And I love durability in a running back, man. So I'm going to take Sheridan as my running back.
Okay, now this is back to you, wide receiver.
Ooh, just one of them.
Yeah, just one. We'll alternate.
Ty James. Just
Okay,
give me
I'm gonna
Ty
go.
James. I think he's the most dominant receiver in FCS football when given the opportunity. And my game plan would just be get the ball to 13.
I'm gonna go with Jalen Coker. Got Sluka, got Coker. That's gonna translate.
Give me Hayden Hatton at Idaho. I think Hayden and Ty James would be the most unstoppable wide receiver duo. And then you give me Gronowski at quarterback that's going to put the ball up for him. I love that duo, man. So give me Hayden Hatton, man. One of the best one-on-one wide receivers in the country.
You went to Idaho for your second wide receiver. I'm gonna go to Idaho State for mine. Get Cheaton James. He's been
Ooh.
having a sneakily good year, 7 touchdowns on the year. I think him at that number 2 receiver is a good pick there. And now for offensive line unit, there's a lot. I mean, the top 3 you could pick from. I mean, you got a lot of choices, but I'm gonna go with South Dakota State. Just keep it simple. I can run the ball behind that left side. Guaranteed, I'm going to fall forward for some yards.
Yeah, I think the obvious number 2 option. Give me Montana State on that one. I think they go, what, 8 deep with that one. They got freshmen, redshirt freshmen, sophomores, redshirt sophomores, juniors, seniors. I mean, they got it all over theirs, man. So give me Montana State for my offensive line.
All right, now you get to pick a defensive player.
Oh, oh man, this one's so tough. Oh, do I want to go corner? Do I want to go edge rusher? This one's tough. If we're going right now, based on how people are playing right this second, I'm going Terrell Allen, Tennessee State at edge rusher. I mean, leading the country in sacks, tackles for loss, forced fumbles. I think he's had 4 straight games of 4+ tackles for loss and 2 straight games of 4 sacks. So give me Terrell Allen at edge rusher, man, for my defense.
Yeah, I got to go with John Pius. You got Allen. That was going to be my pick. I hope you had not taken him first because I think Allen's on a trajectory. He's about to get that Buchanan Award if he continues one more game like that. I think he could get that. But I'm gonna take John Pius, William and Mary, consistent. You know, every game he's gonna get. If he doesn't get a sack, he's getting a hurry, and
Yeah.
those hurries count just as much towards the winning of the games as a sack. So I like him there. And then for my second defensive player, now it gets a little bit interesting. I'm not gonna give you my pick, but I'm thinking Jacob Dobbs just because you need somebody who can tackle. But I'm not gonna pick the linebacker. I played in the secondary, so I got to go with a corner. Miles Hardin, South Dakota. That defense in South Dakota is great. Miles Hardin doesn't get the credit because his numbers aren't necessarily, he's not getting interceptions every week, pass breakers every week, but he's also not getting quarterbacks to look his way. I was at that South Dakota upset of North Dakota State, and he kind of changes some schemes a little bit. Not all the way, but he's not Darrell Revis way. You take away one side of the field completely, but he does make it hard to go to that side. So I think I'm gonna go with John
Hmm.
Pius and Miles Hard as my two defenders.
I like that. I feel like I have to take a corner as well. And oh man, there's so many good ones. I'm just trying to think who do I want? Because I thought about going linebacker too. I think Jacob Dobbs, what Colton Adams as well are just surefire. I mean, even Kelly over at U Albany has had a ridiculous year. Oh my gosh, I'm trying to think of what corner I want to take now. Hmm. You know what? Just based on because I get him for multiple years in this situation, and he's one of the top sophomores in the country. Give me Jason Chambers from Central. I'll go two HBCU guys in my secondary. Chambers, I mean, what, three, four interceptions this year as a sophomore. He's the highest graded cornerback in FCS football right now, in only his second overall year. I think he's going to get some All American nods. Definitely going to be over on Sam Herter's all sophomore team. And I think over the next 2 or 3 years, he's probably going to be the most dominant corner in FCS football, man. So give me Chambers over at North Carolina Central.
Yeah, back-to-back years for North Carolina Central getting a All American, excuse me, in that secondary most likely after Khalil Baker now Jason Chambers. So whoever's that DB coach over there, they gotta give him a raise. You gotta give him a raise after these back-to-back years. So I think we had two good teams. I think if they met up head to head, I don't know. I think it might come down to the wire. We should have picked the kicker. If we were picking a kicker, I know who I would take. I know I wouldn't take
I
two, but
I definitely know who I would take. Hey, man, give me my guy over at Western Carolina. Just automatic. I mean, game winner against Chattanooga on point, man. Give me Richard McCollum if we're gonna take a kicker.
I would take Adrian Olivo from North Carolina Central. That
Also a
would be
good
my
one.
kicker. He's anything inside 50 yards, I don't got to worry about. So that would be my kicker. So we even got the kickers in there. So appreciate you for doing this. Zach McKinnell, FCS Football Central. Make sure y'all go follow him on Instagram, on Twitter. Go read his articles. Some good stuff, especially during the off season. You need to know who transfers. He's on it before I think most people are. So make sure y'all go follow Zach McKinnell.
Man, appreciate you having me, man. This was fun. We'll definitely have to do it again, man. We'll have to make a graphic or something, man, for the fantasy teams. We'll get people to vote on who they think will win that game.
Yeah, for sure. I think I might got you. But we'll see.